Yep, let's watch this together. If you haven't heard about this, this is Jesse Cox, who you have probably heard about. He has been pretty big in World of Warcraft for years. He is like a 15 years World of Warcraft veteran. He started his career in World of Warcraft as a content creator, and then he became more and more like a variety content creator. But he always loved to go back to World of Warcraft. And then about a year ago, he started his adventure of Final Fantasy XIV. And it took him nearly 9 months to finish his adventure. That's how long it took him. And you could really see from the beginning, like I have watched the whole thing from him starting out as a level 1 character and then slowly going till the end. Like I have watched it from the beginning, and it is such an interesting transformation he did, because at the beginning there was clearly this, it's okay. It's very much like World of Warcraft. Alright. Slow. Okay. Like the reaction a lot of people have. Like a lot of people have this reaction of when they're playing Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn for the very first time. It's this, oh, okay. Oh, well, I guess. Yeah, sure. And they're going beyond the Realm Reborn. Like, I'm not saying Realm Reborn is shit, especially now that they've thankfully cut down like some integral parts of it and made it a little bit more fluent. But it's just this from okay to oh my god. Like it's just beautiful to watch. So he made a video. He released this yesterday. And this is 15 years of World of Warcraft versus 1 year of Final Fantasy XIV. Let's watch this together, shall we?
Over the last few weeks, I've started to notice a lot of familiar faces from the World of Warcraft community taking another look at Final Fantasy XIV. So today, I want to talk about the differences between these two games, that while sharing many similar concepts, diverge in their execution of the MMO genre. As a fan of both games and 15-year veteran of WoW, I've often thought about this subject as I now play through Final Fantasy XIV on a near-daily basis since August of last year. I frequently get asked to compare the two, and the simplest way I've been able to do so is the following.
It's such a joy to watch him. He's always such a happy person.
RPG, while Final Fantasy XIV is an RPG MMO. What does this mean besides hopefully sounding clever? In Final Fantasy XIV,
sounds clever.
The entire creative process, the direction, the core concepts, all of it are approached from an intrinsically different design philosophy than that of Warcraft. So it doesn't mean you can't enjoy both, it just means they're made for two very different gamers. Let me explain.
Yeah, so he, I think Yoshi P once explained this pretty well in the No Clip documentary, where he basically said when they started to design A Realm Reborn, and all the consequentially expansions coming afterwards, he basically made the developers play World of Warcraft. Like, that was their homework. Like, you play World of Warcraft because you have to understand what World of Warcraft does, and does better than anybody else. So, like, Yoshi P made it pretty clear that World of Warcraft was a huge influence in creating this game, but they wanted to make it still different. This is the old part, the healers are casting Protect. This is an old, I think this is the benchmark for Stormblood, if I remember correctly. I think this is the benchmark for Stormblood, what you were seeing here in the background. He's not showing all the time his footage.
I think most people have an understanding of what an MMORPG is beyond any sort of definition. There are expectations as to what that experience will be, which is why after playing Final Fantasy XIV, I've come to call it an RPG MMO. Because while all the multiplayer elements are there, I believe they aren't entirely necessary. If the MMO were removed and all we were left with was the RPG, the story, the music, the gameplay, it feels like the player would still have a complete experience. This is because the team behind Final Fantasy XIV, from its inception, has put its focus squarely on storytelling. This design choice then influences every other aspect of the game, from characters to world building to music to animation, all serve to enhance the storytelling. It is without a doubt the single most vital aspect of Final Fantasy XIV. Everything comes from the story.
Yeah, this is what I said before, right? What I said earlier is some people want to skip the story, and I totally do not recommend it because everything is built around the story. The story is pushing the game, and then raid dungeons, hardcore dungeons, and so on and so forth. Like everything else is built surround the story. Whereas in World of Warcraft, you have a lot of those moments where there are dungeons, there's raids, and all that. Like they're the core aspect of the game, and then everything else is built around that core aspect. And again, here in Final Fantasy XIV, it's the other way around. The story is the core center of everything, and then raids and whatnot are built around that idea.
Everything is related to the story, and everything exists to service the story.
Yep.
So as we move forward in this video, you'll see every time I bring up a comparison or idea in Final Fantasy XIV, it's going to be in some way related to the story. And it's because of this one fact that Final Fantasy and WoW can still feel similar to a player moving between the two, but also be vastly different experiences. Let me just throw this out there. What was the story of vanilla World of Warcraft? If you had to think, it's because there was no story. There were quests, there was lore, certainly different adventures to get involved in, but no overarching story.
Nope.
There was no driving force behind what you were doing, besides the desire to gain levels, abilities.
There was like a small story part in the regions.
The story of the World of Warcraft was what you, the player, made it.
Yep.
It was trying to find the right Zevras in the Barrens. It was sneaking into the undeveloped Mount Hyjal. It's trying to raid the enemy capital. Those were the experiences we remember.
Like, I still remember that there was a story in Westfall, like the idea of why the Defiant Brotherhood is like rising in Westfall and what the heck is going on and how they came to be. Like there was always like a little bit of a story in World of Warcraft, but they were mostly kept in their zones, and yeah, there was no overarching story. Like if you left the zone, you left the zone and the story behind you and you started something new.
In fact, the most recent example of a great WoW memory I have is getting the Alliance Horde Slayer title and that achievement in BFA. The whole point is that you kill enough enemy players to literally be marked on the map as a bounty, and then people try to come kill you, and if you survive long enough, you get an achievement. It was one of the most exhilarating recent memories I have in the game. I loved every moment of it. In Final Fantasy XIV, if you ask someone their favorite moment, and I did, almost every single person is going to say theirs is related to story. Obviously, this isn't every player, as many players find the same camaraderie and accomplishment as WoW players when taking down harder bosses. But for the majority of players, the story is not just an important part of the game, it's also something that binds the community together. With that said, after years of playing WoW, to say there isn't a fan base for the world or story building they're doing would be foolish, as I am one of them. But let's be real, the majority of players simply do not care about the plot of Warcraft. I'd have to guess that's because it was never really the driving force of the game that got them playing in the first place, and more importantly, sticking with it. The fact is, as Blizzard moves more towards storytelling in their more recent expansions, they've developed multiple ways of getting across major plot information to players who may be interested, but it's not integral for the player's enjoyment. It's this delivery that provides the necessary surface-level context to keep a player engaged.
I also find that the story in itself in World of Warcraft is contradicting itself quite often. Like, I said this even back in the day when they started with World of Warcraft and the Wrath of the Lich King, right? When Arthur dies at the end, and they're showing him as this guy who got basically tricked into becoming the Lich King, and the Lich King was just using him as a tool and all that. And it's like, have you played Warcraft 3? Have you seen what Arthas did way before he became, like, he found Frostmourne? Way before, like, he becomes the Lich King in the Frozen Throne? Have you seen all the bullshit he basically pulled and all the massacres. Like, he killed millions of people. It's like, so how can you make it look like as if Arthur's was like this sweet innocent boy who got tricked? It's like, there is no redemption story of Arthur's. Like, Arthur's was who he was. And the same goes like with a lot of other stuff. It's like Sylvanas. It's like she was always against the Scourge. Like, she hated her existence for being an undead, right? And then at some point she became basically what Arthur's was, right? And there is no real explanation to this. It's just like, oh yeah, Sylvanas is now the evil person. It's like, what is the explanation behind all this? And it makes no sense for the years. And like, they are retconning and changing a lot of stuff in World of Warcraft. It is so weird.
Did you see anything? No, sir. I didn't see you playing with your dolls again. Good.
And Dragadive, thank you very much for subscribing or gifting a sub to Skyroby. I do appreciate that. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. Thank you. Wow, your symbol is now shining. Damn. I think I've never seen it like that. By the way, folks, what we will also do probably tomorrow, not today, but tomorrow, I will put up a goal for a new HD drive. I want to do like a little founding goal. It will not be expensive. I have already found an HD drive. It will cost $90, but I want to do like a founding goal for my HD drive, because as you know, unfortunately, my HD drive, my data HD drive with all the stuff on it, is dying pretty much. It's absolutely useless at this point. It's not completely dead yet, but it is dying. And yeah, unfortunately, I'm a little bit low on money for various reasons, mostly real life reasons and things I had to do there. So this is coming in a very inappropriate time. So we will put that up. We will see if we can actually reach the goal. I would appreciate that. But we will do that tomorrow. Let's go back to the video here. Sorry for the long interruption.
But has also formed a complicated relationship with players who do enjoy story and world building in Warcraft. Team leads and devs change, shifting the vision for each expansion to fit what is essentially the
I think that's the biggest problem, that the World of Warcraft
planned ahead, it's very
team
clear
is
that things
changing
have changed or
far too
will
often.
change based on necessity. Main characters vanish, story elements are left behind, and lore is retconned to fit.
That's
with the
true,
moment.
Rekko, and thank you.
As a big old lore nerd, years of that have definitely left me kind of...
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant, right? It's this, every time there's a new expansion or teams are changing up, especially right now, Blizzard, it's like they're changing the story so much where I'm just like, what the heck? It's so weird. And again, Dragodive, thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate the support.
Jaded
And
when
hi,
it comes
Sky.
to WoW.
Hi.
A silly example is years ago at BlizzCon, I asked the devs about that weird snake tail and Gundrak. I was like, what is that thing? Their response then, and ever since, has pretty much been, we really don't know. Perhaps it was snuck in, perhaps it was dropped content. Who knows? All I can say is, if it was in Final Fantasy XIV, that snake tail would not only have had a purpose, but it would have shown up 2 expansions later as an important character in an ongoing story.
I mean, that's true.
Yep, this is going to be one of those videos that's long enough to be split into multiple parts. But it's good, because it allows us to dive a little deeper. When it comes to content, both games feature the staples of the MMORPG genre to differing degrees. Leveling, dungeons, raids, PvP, special events, grinds, and daily quests. In fact, some on the 2 dev teams are friends, and they definitely borrow ideas from each other all the time. Yoshi P...
Yeah, but is that a response to Final Fantasy XIV? Did you mention that earlier? Yeah, because Final Fantasy is like not doing really that. if that is what you mean.
The director of Final Fantasy XIV, is notably a huge Blizzard fan. The difference, of course, comes from what the dev teams have decided the focus of their games should be. The best way I can simplify this is to say that Warcraft is more about the destination, and Final Fantasy XIV is more about the journey. Earlier. As an example, in WoW, the leveling process in, say, a new expansion is a buffer between you and max level where the real game starts. I was once told by a friend that he always thought of it as advertisement for places that later on at max level you'll spend time grinding. Once you've leveled up, you can begin doing harder dungeons, farming gear in Mythic Plus, running raids, joining PvP battlegrounds or arenas, and doing your daily quests or grinding rep. And for years, this has not only been a pretty standard MMORPG cycle, but WoW has been the best at it. The goal, of course, is keeping players engaged and logged in. And going back to our original story discussion, doing most of these things continues the Warcraft story as well. In Final Fantasy XIV, it's a bit different. With the story being the most important part, this means leveling isn't just a rush to max level to experience the cool parts. The cool parts are the leveling. At max level, there are certainly raids and dailies and grinds.
And they're PvP, cool.
But they're nowhere near the complexity of WoW. Leveling up a job in Final Fantasy XIV isn't just...
I mean, I kind of disagree with that because he says it's not the complexity. World of Warcraft dailies do not have complexity. World of Warcraft dailies are a chore and you have to do them for the sake of it. That's the problem I have with a lot of the World of Warcraft dailies. It's like, they are not really more complex, it's just that you have to do them to get to some of the fun parts of the game, and they're pretty boring. And Final Fantasy is just like, yeah, we have some dailies here you can do for the, especially for the beast alliances and beast tribes, sure, whatever. But it's not like what World of Warcraft is doing.
It's about the leveling process either. Sure, and while you can level up an alt, experience the other faction's story, and a lot of people enjoy that. But in Final Fantasy XIV, each job has its own story and quests associated with it. You know, they're varying in size and scope, but like the Dark Knight, for example, is universally loved for being some of the best storytelling in the game. But again, story is what it's about. Most large-scale raids only have one difficulty level and are more events than actual team-building struggles. Those raids and trials that do have harder modes are canonically fan-fiction versions of the events, so players who are just there for the story won't miss anything if they don't have time for harder content. PvP, while vibrant, is nothing close to that of WoW. Reputations and dailies exist, but not in a way that forces the player to spend a significant amount of time.
Exactly that. It's like none of the things in the game are really there to make you do it. Like, if you don't do the dailies, if you don't do your reputation farming, that's fine. That's fine. Nobody will think less of you. You are not missing out on stuff. If you don't want to do PvP, that's fine. There's tons of other stuffs you can do.
But you're rewarded in a way that makes it feel like you're kind of getting one over on the devs for the amount of time you actually put into it. Let me give you some specific examples. Let's talk reputation grinds. Admittedly, in WoW, I haven't played much beyond the start of max level content in Shadowlands, and this may be different, but if we look at most...
What I've heard of the reputation grinds in World of Warcraft, well, I mean, as they have always been in the past, like every reputation grind was pretty boring. It was a chore. And this is why there is this meme going around that people are now calling Choregust, or Choregust, right? It's a chore. Choregust. You get the idea. And Final Fantasy is not doing that, but let's
most reputation grinds. It's usually something along the lines of like, you earn 750 rep a day with a weekly bonus of some sort, and you need 40 to 50k rep to reach Exalted. So you're looking at, I don't know, over a month of rep farming to reach max reputation. This, of course, is part of the design philosophy again, to keep you engaged in the world longer. In Final Fantasy XIV, while some of the older reputations are pretty similar, the newer ones, take Pixies for example, are designed not only to be fast, but to feel very rewarding. Every day you get 3 quests that take roughly 15 minutes to complete, and as a reward, you get tons of reputation, tokens that you can eventually buy rep items with, and then loads of experience. I'm talking like a quarter of your XP bar for 3 quests. And this is great because not only does it make grinding rep easy, but it also rewards you for doing it on one of your other jobs, incentivizing you to level additional classes. Let's take another example. Unlocking flight. In WoW, unlocking flight has always been a process. A thing that you really had to earn. Currently, I think to unlock flight, it's something like getting Renown 44 and completing the last sigil and having completed Chapter 12 of the Covenant campaign, receiving memories to unlock account-wide flying.
Where those quests found? You mean the reputation quests? You have to unlock them in every game aspect or dungeon, and look it up on the wiki. You have to do a pre-quest to start those. The pre-quest takes 5 minutes. It's a joke, and then you can do them. But you have to see like if you have the right level for it. I think the base game starts at level 41, if I'm not completely mistaken. Yeah, I think it starts at 41. So look it up in the Wikipedia and look for the beast tribes. You're still so you're in Stormblood. So yeah, you should have the beast tribes in Stormblood depending on which level you have. If this is your first playthrough, just follow the storyline. Like, I can only say it again, just do the main story quest. You don't have to do the rest yet. Like, you can do that with your second job. Just follow the main quest. That's the only thing you have to do in Final Fantasy XIV for your first playthrough.
And then you can do it in Shadowlands. In Final Fantasy XIV, while exploring the map that you're already exploring anyway, you use a compass to find little green wind orbies, and when you find them all and you complete the area story arc, you unlock flying for that specific zone. It's not account-wide, but it's easy enough to get just by going through the leveling process.
It's not account-wide, that is true, but that doesn't matter, because in Final Fantasy XIV you were creating one character, and that's it. So if you have unlocked it with one character, you are good to go. There's absolutely no reason anymore in Final Fantasy XIV to create a second account. Or a second character, not a second account, a second character. There's no reason for that. Because you can experience literally everything with one character. And you can now even reset the main story and just use a twink to go through the main story.
From a design standpoint, I love this. When I first learned this is how you got flying in Final Fantasy XIV, I was actually angry about all the time WoW made me waste. In Final Fantasy XIV, you get to experience the zone, which is what WoW's trying to get you to do, but 14 doesn't gate your ability to move through it quicker in the future behind some sort of grind. Which has probably got a few of you now thinking, Jesse, you're making it seem like you don't have to work for much in Final Fantasy XIV. But of course you do. There are things like fancy relic weapon grinds and stuff like that, but not nearly to the degree that WoW makes you grind out.
Here's the problem. I don't understand, and sorry if I'm interrupting this again. I don't understand why people always like to say, like, yeah, you don't have to work for it. You have to work for it. There are still things in this game which can be ridiculously hard, especially because the old content in Final Fantasy XIV never fades out. Like, if you want to go back and you want to get your shiny bling bling super rare legendary weapon from a previous expansion, you still have to do the same content with that equipment and with that level. Like, you are getting nothing for free there. And it is really tough. Like, as the people who are still going for the Coil of Bahamut, which was one of the endgame raids, Coil of Bahamut was A Realm Reborn, which was the base game. We are now 3 expansions in. That thing is still murder. Absolute murder. And there's a lot of stuff. But the difference is that Final Fantasy XIV respects your time and just makes it harder, where World of Warcraft is just, oh yeah, you have to kill 10,000 lead mobs to activate this particular thing for you. And Final Fantasy XIV is like, yeah, you have to kill this one boss to get the thing you want, but that boss is hard. And I like that more. Like, don't throw tens of thousands of a useless thing at me and make it look like I have to farm for 8 hours just because it takes that long. I like it more that the thing you have to do is just hard to achieve. And that's, again, what Final Fantasy XIV does. Yeah, like, it's like, oh, work in a video game is good. What? No! I'm playing video games not for the work. I'm playing video games to have fun and enjoy them. Not to work.
Honestly, I think we're so used to Blizzard making us go through content multiple times for months in order to unlock something like flying that anything less seems ridiculously easy. But that shouldn't be the case, gang. I don't know anyone who enjoys it, but we still do it. It all just comes down to the fact that the Final Fantasy XIV devs are not trying to keep you in their world for countless hours. So it seems like everything is a little easier. The fact is, the 14 devs have literally said they don't care if you log in every day. Get what you want from their game, come back when you want more. Instead,
this is what Blizzard is trying
Final Fantasy XIV
a lot
are something
right now.
Entirely different. I recently saw this ad for Final Fantasy XIV.
Keeping people engaged is like the big goal for Blizzard. Like, seriously. It's their metric. Like, every time they have their investor conference, they're not caring about the amount of subs. They're not caring how much money World of Warcraft did. What they care for is the metric of how often people logged in and how much the engagement was.
And it made me laugh, because I've never seen anything like this for WoW. But most Final Fantasy XIV players will tell you this is where the majority of your max level adventure lies. Look at this thing.
Yeah.
Gathering, crafting, free companies or guilds, housing, fashion, the Gold Saucer, which is like a permanent version of the Darkmoon Fair. And I'll be honest.
It's a casino.
Yeah, this is pretty much Endgame in Final Fantasy XIV. That's not to say 14 doesn't have challenging content for those looking for a more traditional MMO raiding experience, but like, the point I'm trying to make is that in WoW, the endgame focus is on harder and harder raiding and mythics.
There's
PvE,
nothing else to do.
both arena, battleground, and world, with all the other things in the game existing to aid in doing so. In 14, the endgame focus is more diverse.
Yeah,
Although there
you
are
have so
savage
many
ultimate
other
difficulty
things to
raids
do.
Designed for
If you
those
don't
who
want
a more
to
challenging
raid,
experience, there's also
there's
things
still
like
enough to
building
do.
a cool guild house, or crafting a special weapon from a weird boss drop, or going on treasure hunts. There's more to do than just raiding for the sake of raiding. Speaking of crafting, one of the biggest issues I have with WoW is that crafting for so long has seemed totally pointless once Looking for Raid was created. Any gear you could craft, say as a leather worker, was useless for those who could just get raid gear easily.
Not only that, like, I know I'm like the problem is in World of Warcraft, I'm really at the point where I'm just asking myself, why does crafting exist? Why is that a thing? Crafting has no right to be in the game anymore. It's a completely useless thing at this point, like literally useless. Like, if they would announce next expansion that they're removing crafting from the game, I think most of the community wouldn't even bat an eye and would just be like, oh, okay, makes sense. And it is the other way around in Final Fantasy XIV. If they would announce that they're removing crafting from the game, I think Eorzea would burn. Like, crafting is such a crazy part in this game.
Meanwhile, in Final Fantasy XIV, gathering and crafting is very much a major part of the endgame experience. If you're curious about other things, PvP for example, I mean, in this case, WoW definitely wins this one. There is PvP in Final Fantasy XIV in the form of war games, and there are many people who enjoy it. It's just that there's a wider variety and larger community in WoW. It is, after all, part of the core concept. Faction warfare. This doesn't exist in 14. There are no warring player factions. In fact, much of the story is about getting...
Yeah, to put one last point into crafting before we are moving on too far from it. Crafting, you have your own leveling experience, right? You have your own class, so to speak, or job. You have your own skills. Crafting is actually something which is thought out. When you are trying to craft something, it's a mini game. And you can screw that mini game up and with that you can screw up your crafting. So there's actually a little bit of skill needed to do the crafting efficiently. And then the newest thing they basically implemented with crafting is you can now rebuild a whole city in Final Fantasy XIV. Like, there are people, and I kid you not, in Final Fantasy XIV who have not touched any of the other content but crafting. They're only doing crafting. Yeah, they do the main quest ones because they have to unlock a few things here and there, so they're still following the main quest. But the reality is, the moment they don't have to do the main quest, the moment they don't have to do like PvE, they will go back to crafting and do nothing else. It's kind of crazy.
All the nations of the world on the same team. The funny thing is, as WoW attempts to add more story, the PvP they're doing makes less and less sense narratively. And that's, I mean, just the tip of the iceberg of the Endgame experience. There's a lot more to talk about, but since we are talking Endgame, I think we should flip it and do the starting experience. Going back to the design philosophies of the two games, we can see differences in the premise
No,
of
you're in
each
trouble.
and how it affects your intro into the game. In World of Warcraft, you start your experience as just one of the many faces in service of your chosen faction. Over time, your actions in defeating various threats increase your importance to the world. In Final Fantasy XIV, you are literally
And they
the
are
warrior
still
of light,
sending you
the
back,
chosen hero
back to kill
from
rats.
moment one. There is no denying your importance to the story. The entire narrative revolves around you. Even though initially you're not recognized as such, I mean, that's what you are. Quickly proving yourself to the world. From that point on, every character not only acknowledges you, but they recognize the importance of your role over theirs. So add that to the story being the most important element, and you'll see how this might be a daunting task for some new players. Much of the 14 starting experience it's pretty slow. World building, character introduction, lasting roughly the first 50 levels. I actually think this is one of the biggest problems Final Fantasy XIV has, as it's a hard...
It's like a TV show which really just tries to introduce like all the characters for multiple hours, or like an anime, right? When you are watching an anime, it's like this first episode, or again, TV show, where they're just throwing all those characters at you, where basically nothing happens. And it's really just, this is character X, this is character Y, this is their quirks, their perks, their gender. And it's just like, oh, okay. And this is what Final Fantasy is doing basically in the first like 50 levels or so, where they're really just trying to introduce all the characters, their goals, their gender, what they mean, and so on and so forth. And it's just like, okay. Boring, but okay.
Hard sell to explain how phenomenal this game becomes only after you put in 40 hours. But that's exactly what I was told, and what I have told others.
Yep.
Because it's true. The strong connection to narrative hurts the starting experience, especially for new players who may have friends playing or seen an amazing moment from a recent expansion, but they can't play it themselves without playing through 100 hours of story or paying for a skip and finding themselves completely disconnected from the plot. And that is a real shame, because the game uses all of that story and setup to build out the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
So if you skip over the starting experience, the amount of stuff you miss is mind-boggling. And
It's
because
bad.
the story is so well told, and all the characters and locations and factions, etc., are so perfectly fit into the puzzle that is the main plot, that when twists happen, they make perfect sense. When reveals are made, it's like, oh yeah, of course. All because of that level 1 through 50 experience laying the foundation.
I think that's the biggest problem. It's like really, the story gets really good, but at the beginning, people want to play a game, and they cannot really change a Realm Reborn. They basically have to do another Realm Reborn on a Realm Reborn to fix the issues it has. And it makes sense that it is how it is, because, well, they had a low budget, they didn't hit the time, and a Realm Reborn is tough sometimes. And yes, you can skip it, but it is like skipping the first season of Game of Thrones, or skipping the first season of any TV show which has like a really integrated story, and then you are just like, what? And again, keep in mind, Final Fantasy XIV doesn't exist in a bubble. So they might introduce a character in A Realm Reborn, stop mentioning that character for a whole expansion, and then the character is coming back and it's like, I am back. And because you have played that part, you realize, oh, it's this guy. How could I forget about him? But if you have skipped that first introduction, it comes very much down to, huh? Like, huh? You really don't want to do that.
And as I've said, I've experienced both ends of this. Years ago when the game first came out, I gave it a shot, and around level 40 was totally burnt out. It wasn't until I returned last year looking for something new that I gave the game a second chance on the recommendation of a friend. I'm so glad I listened, because for a fan of story like me, what this game offers is a fantastic experience.
I think I know
Sadly,
who the friend
the
is.
reason behind Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn slow start, can be traced back to its origins as a reboot of the disaster that was the original Final Fantasy XIV. The budget was small, the timetable was short,
This is Final Fantasy.
and it shows. It isn't until the
1.0.
later patches of A Realm Reborn and the release of the first expansion, Heavensward, that the game truly shines. The production value skyrockets, the writing is less long-winded, the voice actors change, just about everything is better than where it started. And universally, everyone acknowledges this fact. Which is
If you
why
haven't
I
seen the
assume
no-clip
free
documentary
trial
on Final
with themes
Fantasy
and all
XIV,
includes
watch it.
Heavensward.
It's so
If
good.
you're gonna keep playing the game, it's the first expansion that's gonna get you. What's totally insane about all of that is only by sticking with it can you then truly appreciate the slow burn A Realm Reborn was and all the ideas it introduces that later become very important. It's like when your parents gave you some advice as a kid and you didn't listen, and now you're 30 and you're like, damn, that was good advice. I should have listened.
Man, can you stop calling me out like that, Jesse? Please? I'm trying to running a stream here, okay? Like, don't call me all that out like that. God damn it.
But again, how do you sell that to people? Meanwhile, the WoW starting experience is much more welcoming to new players because they keep updating it and changing it, a thing Final Fantasy XIV can't do without damaging the plot it's trying to set up. Because Warcraft doesn't concern itself with this. They now offer multiple ways to level, a special starting zone designed to teach new players. They have streamlined the process of getting your character to the end game, which, as we discussed, is a core design philosophy. But this means, depending on when you started playing, your story experience in World of Warcraft could be entirely different from another player. Some moments I may have experienced years ago are no longer in the game, making it so things that bind players and keep them engaged in the game are not story, but it's progression systems, guild dynamics, and faction conflict, which I think explains why people enjoy playing Classic, as it has all the things I just listed, but also a shared sense of existing in the same world, which I feel like I think many of you would say the current iteration of WoW does not have. Another way to look at this is how new content is delivered. If we look at the two most recent completed content cycles in both WoW and 14, the picture we get of everything I've been talking about becomes more clear. In WoW, the new content starts with the release of a trailer, a big budget, stunningly well made, sometimes shocking reveal. It's usually a way for Blizzard
Final
to show
Fantasy
the
XIV is
first
also doing
major
that.
exciting story moments. This is something like Sylvanas
Well, no,
breaking
actually,
up
they are
with
setting the
domination or
world
definitely destroying the world.
in the
Then,
trailer.
before launch, there's a book and maybe some short stories about major characters involved in the next expansion. We'll get a pre-patch event, and then the expansion will release. And for the most part, every WoW expansion follows a similar formula. We get a short burst of main story before pausing for leveling content and eventually returning to the main plot. Then a major raid is released, and the story for the main plot continues as we get a series of patches culminating in the last patch of the expansion and the showdown with the big bad. Then the cycle begins again with a new trailer. Because of its heavily story-based nature, almost all of the content in 14 is delivered in-game. So in the previous expansion's fourth major patch, you'll get hints of a new story. By the time the fifth major patch rolls around, you'll have more information, important details, or new jobs will be hinted at. And then, around the same time, we get the trailer. Unlike WoW, it's not a single moment, but a series of vignettes and a hint of things to come in the next expansion. Then at launch, the main story is experienced and completed throughout the leveling process. The first major patch and so on are there to wrap up loose ends, tell new smaller stories either via raid or a series of max level trials, or introduce new areas that serve as a way to grind out special weapon skins. And then, by the end of the third major patch, the story of the expansion is wrapped up. And then the fourth patch continues the trend of hinting at what will be in the new expansion. So once again, I'm sure the obvious difference comes down to the initial design choice by the two dev teams. The reason the Warcraft patch cycle is what it is to keep players engaged longer. So if you're a fan of story, for example, you need to keep with it through all the patches to see the end. While Final Fantasy XIV, designed to deliver story most of all, gives you a completed one at launch, then adds additional adventures afterwards.
True.
The most notable difference in gameplay between the two, I think, is to start, the global cooldown in Final Fantasy XIV is 2.5 seconds.
Yes.
So when
I love this. When World of Warcraft players are first hearing about this, when I first heard about it, I wasn't better. I was like, man, this is so slow. What is the global cooldown? Let's Google it. And you hear like, yeah, the global cooldown is 2.5 seconds. And you are like, how much? It's so weird. But it makes sense.
when you're level 10, for example, and you only have 3 abilities, it seems like there's a lot of downtime. Later on, as you unlock other off-cooldown skills or increase your stats to lower your GCD, this changes, but for the start, it definitely feels pretty slow. This also translates into differences between the spell and ability rotations of the two games. Warcraft is more reactionary. Build up a bar or wait for a crit to trigger an ability, while Final Fantasy XIV is more proactive, where the player weaves a pattern of combos together to create a string of pre-planned attacks. Even the procs in Final Fantasy XIV are associated with patterns and planning. Combat in WoW is like a street brawl, and Final Fantasy XIV is like a dance. And because 14 is more of a dance, the combat is more spectacular, and the spell effects are way more flashy than those in WoW. And for the most part, spell effects aren't necessarily designed with large groups in mind, unlike Warcraft. So when you're in a 24-man raid and all the effects are going off, it can sometimes feel blinding. So much so that there are options in 14
you can deactivate
to
it,
decrease or turn them off for other players. Speaking of making changes to the game,
14 you can completely take that out.
Pretty amazing HUD customization in the base game. While you can do a lot more with the various add-ons in WoW, 14 gives you enough tools to customize your experience so that you don't feel the absence of add-on support. This UI customization allows for the use of a controller, which the game was designed with in mind, allowing for cross-platform play between PC and PlayStation. This allows for some pretty fun player interface options and looks, letting you clutter your screen with as much information or as little as you want. And we can't forget about the accessibility of players who simply can't use a mouse and keyboard. Accessibility can be found in 14 in the form of universal language on markers and effects. I'm sure that as you've watched this video, you've noticed in the Final Fantasy XIV segments the same markers on the ground over and over and over again, to the point where players can have some idea of what's coming their way based on the effect. They understand what's about to happen and what's required. Another major gameplay difference, which is probably what we should have started with, is the ability for one character to play every job or class in the game and switch between them. If you choose Black Mage to start, for example, like I did, and you end up hating it, like I did, then you can switch to another job and try something new. Fall in love with something new, like a Red Mage, or a Warrior, or a Dragoon, like I did. And 14 is designed with this one character leveling multiple things in mind. WoW, on the other hand, is designed around having to create multiple alts to try different classes. But unlike 14, each of these new characters has some sort of racial ability or special action, and 14...
Oh man, I started as a Black Mage and I do not like it very much, but I'm level 65. Try something else. And what do you mean you don't like the Black Mage? Excuse you? Like, you're in Stormblood. That means you're complaining about my balance of the Black Mage in Stormblood. What? What do you mean you don't like what I did? Yeah, it's kind of funny for the people who didn't know. I was actually working at Final Fantasy XIV with the Stormblood expansion, and I was basically one of the people who did balancing for dungeons and classes, or was helping with that. And I think I was one of the main parts of the Black Mage and Stormblood. I'm not sure if a lot of people enjoyed that in particular, but it was definitely fun. Yeah, Black Mage, they got a little bit better over the years. To put it bluntly, before anybody is like, no, I didn't design the Black Mage or anything. Like, no, I was for everyone who is interested, I was a consultant for Final Fantasy XIV, Stormblood, and I was basically on the team for balancing, so to speak, like Q&A and balancing. And I was definitely one of the main Black Mage players, so to speak. Yeah. Dragoon is just a floor tank. Wow. Legend. Wow. I see some bias here in the chat. It's really tough to find your class. Like, I love the Astrologian till Shadowbringers. I do not like the Astrologian anymore. Like, I'm actually very disappointed by how the Astrologian plays now. And I hope they're changing it with the next expansion. But finding your class is tough. It's tough. Yeah. And sorry, I know it's not a class, it's a job. I'm aware of that. But, you know. There's one class that is 2 jobs. Are we talking about Blue Mage? What? What? What are we talking here about? Oh, the prerequisites. Now I know what you were talking about. What? Thank you. Yes, I know. You were starting with a class and then you're choosing a job because you have to combine jobs, but they basically gave up on that later on with the expansion ones. Yes, I know what you are now. Like, I'm like, what are we talking about here? But no, I knew. Yeah, I was not following chat there for a second. Like, what?
Doesn't have that. It doesn't mean you can't level alts in 14, but it's unnecessary to experience all the game has to offer. Warcraft does, however, have more overall combat diversity, with the option to choose talents and spec out your character in fun, weird ways, although a lot of the time people just look up what the best is. Yeah. Also, the classes in WoW seem more wild and vibrant compared to that of Final Fantasy XIV.
Here's the thing. Final Fantasy XIV had that to a certain degree, where you had points which you had to put into your abilities, where you had points to put into your skills, like you want to put the points in strength, vitality, agility, and all that. Like old school RPG. They took that out, though, because everyone was just following the guides, and they were like, yeah, okay, the difference is not that big, and everyone is just doing, like, the cookie cutter stuff. Like, we can just take that out. So, it was in the game once, but they took that out gradually.
There are no Demon Hunter or Brewmaster analog, for example. It does have a Blue Mage, but it's treated as more of a joke class with wacky overpowered abilities that isn't really allowed in current content. Also, WoW really nails raiding and PvP. It's what the game was designed for, and they do it very well. The raids in WoW are larger and more intricate, the PvP is more varied and complex, but Final Fantasy XIV does something very fun with its dungeons, raids, and trials by including synced, unsynced, and minimum item level settings. You can change the difficulty of a dungeon, for example, to be exactly how it was when you first ran it in your low-level gear, or to cheese the hell out of it at max level. The last thing of note is that when crafting or gathering, 14 is much more visual and complex than WoW. It's not just clicking a node. They're actually separate jobs, separate skills, separate stories, and separate gear that you can play without ever doing the main story. Although you'd need it to unlock some zones, there are whole events built around using these crafting and gathering jobs. Building a city, for example. And as I mentioned before, crafting actually makes viable gear, unlike WoW, whose crafters are mostly useless once people can do looking for raid. You're going to get tired of hearing me say it, you probably already are, but story plays a major role in the aesthetics of 14 versus WoW as well. Both games look very good, let me be clear, but they each have their own visual style. WoW is slightly more cartoony and exaggerated.
The problem is, because of that cartoony look, World of Warcraft still looks good. Because the art style, people can just go ham. The problem is with Final Fantasy XIV that it was designed as a PlayStation 3 game in mind. And even though the PlayStation 3 version doesn't exist anymore, the engine is still the same. Like, the graphics are still, they're slightly better, they're using more lighting effects and whatnot, but the base graphics are still the same, and they didn't hold up very well.
Everyone has giant muscles, even the fat dudes and the gnomes. 14 is a bit more subdued in all regards. Even the colors are more toned down. Some might call the character designs a bit anime. Meanwhile, the WoW character designs are more diverse than 14 as well. Trolls, undead, humans, pandas. In 14, it's more like human, tiny human, cat human, horny human. The biggest difference I've noticed,
but the same thing is true for WoW.
Emotive characters and WoW's wider array of visually diverse.
Okay.
These emotive characters
Point.
make it so 14 can easily work in numerous in-game cutscenes and match the voices. In order to do the same thing in WoW, custom crafted scenes are made, which take time and limit the number that can be included. That's not to say that Warcraft characters can't show emotion, or Final Fantasy doesn't have visually diverse zones, but each does their thing better. WoW can get more wild with their visual design because they aren't limited by players on older consoles. The PS3 version of 14 was still available until 2017, which means the PS4 version will be limiting players for a few years still. Because its limits are fewer and the devs can update and change their graphics more frequently, WoW can create a more wild, outlandish, and visually striking environment for players to explore. And because 14 was started with storytelling in mind, characters' faces are designed to show a wider array of emotions. WoW, on the other hand, added story after the fact, so the game wasn't designed to have a lot of close-up facial animations. So as they add new in-game cinematics, many of the ones we're getting now seem to have these weird flappy jaw yapping things
It looks so bad.
And that stands out from the other higher quality cinematic stuff we're used to getting in WoW.
It looks so bad sometimes.
The music of these games is also another thing worth pointing out, as it again is a perfect example of my original thesis. Like the graphic design of the games, they both have good music. But similar to WoW's visual style, Final Fantasy XIV's musical style is far more diverse and wild and fun. In Warcraft, music is mostly ambient, used to set the mood of a zone or a dungeon, usually something catchy, repeating, and not all that intrusive. But many times, because of its generalized nature, there are moments where it might not fit the events that are on screen in an epic boss fight, for example. There's plenty of times I remember struggling through a raid to get to the final boss, and the music was pretty much the same as when I started the raid. Meanwhile, in 14, because the music, like everything else, is connected to the story, it's more moment-to-moment than WoW. Again, it's not like WoW doesn't do story moment music, or Final Fantasy XIV doesn't have ambient zone themes.
No, the music is just...
They both do their own thing way more. Final Fantasy XIV has musical themes for sad moments and happy moments.
The Final Fantasy XIV music is just...
It sometimes even tells a story. There are theme songs and
so good.
And, more importantly, battle music.
I mean, he is right. Salvation. Oh, sorry. I never liked this fight in particular. It's one of the 4 Beast Lords in Stormlord. It's the Phoenix.
It's just so good. Nothing makes wiping or learning a fight more tolerable than a catchy song in the background. Truthfully, Final Fantasy XIV just has a larger variety of music and uses it better than WoW. Which is crazy because I remember listening to the soundtrack for WoW Legion and thinking how great it was, only to find out there were some songs not even used in the game, or if they were, I don't remember or missed it. I recall multiple
Those
versions
names.
of Anduin's theme, only for him to barely be involved in the main Legion storyline, and his theme to show up like maybe once or twice. That's so crazy to know they have all this amazing talent at Blizzard making music, and they don't even use it all? And remember Elite Tauren Chieftain? Final Fantasy XIV has a band of devs called the Primals.
Well,
Except they don't just do meme songs. They play
Like, Tauren Chieftain
all
don't
the
exist
hits from the
anymore
game.
because I think most
Lyrics
of the
and all.
developers moved
And let me tell
on.
you, they got some bangers. The difference is, while ETC was phased out of live events, the Primals are the highlights that everyone looks forward to. It's as if the WoW community thought ETC was kind of lame, and Final Fantasy XIV fans are like, more Primals, please.
I mean, yes.
So there's one last thing to talk about, and I'm sure it won't be controversial at all. The communities. I've been in the WoW community long enough to have formed a pretty substantial theory about it. I know I'm going to get lots of crap for this one.
Yeah.
But I think the general notion is that it's pretty toxic.
It is.
Yes, your personal guild might be awesome, but generally, I think we can all agree there are high levels of toxicity in the WoW.
Because everyone is competing against each other, and there's not just in PvP, like the PvP notion which is going around, but for PvE itself, like everyone has basically learned over the years to fight for themselves, and it is a very much like dog eats dog mentality they have in this game. Like, you're not trying to work together. You don't have an ultimate goal. There is no like understanding. Like, as I said before, right? Like, I've been playing a new job through the starting dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV over the weekend, and there were a lot of new players coming in. Well, there is a dungeon finder in Final Fantasy XIV and it works, and you could clearly see that they are coming from a Final Fantasy, from a World of Warcraft background, because they were passive-aggressive, kind of toxic, and they were always pissed when something doesn't work immediately how they want it to work. And in Final Fantasy XIV, that's just not the case. Like, oh, you vibed in a normal dungeon? Happens. Somebody made a mistake? Who cares? It doesn't matter. Like, it's just like Final Fantasy has this, as I said before, this chill moment. Just chill. Calm down. Take your time. Enjoy. And World of Warcraft is this, no, this has to work perfect. Nobody has time for this. Like, if you are in this dungeon, we expect you to know this dungeon in and out, to know the boss fights in and out, and you better perform. If you don't perform, we will make the chat hell, and then afterwards we will kick you. And Final Fantasy XIV, nobody expects anything from the tank, from the healer, like even the DPS. It's like, this is one of the reasons why I've met a lot of people who are afraid to play a tank or a healer, because they remember their times in World of Warcraft where they did exactly that, and the community is just absolutely toxic to you. Oh, you are a tank? Well, you better know this dungeon in and out, because you are the tank. In Final Fantasy XIV, it's like, oh, you have this little sprout symbol, like sprouts. This is what noobs are being basically called in Final Fantasy XIV. Do you have the sprout symbol to your name? Oh, you're a new player. Okay, you have absolutely no clue what's going on. Let's see what happens. If something goes wrong, if there are questions, as a like long-standing player, you can answer them, and that's fine. But you do not expect anything from Sprout players, because they are still trying to get their bearings.
Community. And I believe
he took my gear. I had somebody yesterday. I was rolling on a helmet for my paladin, and there was a dragoon in the group, and he wanted that helmet too, and he was so pissed about it. He was like talking for the rest of the dungeon about how this helmet would have increased their stats by 20 and it was needed. They needed this upgrade. Why didn't he get that? It's like, dude, I would have traded with him if I could. But, dude, like, it doesn't matter. Believe me. In about 1 hour, the latest, you will already get a better helmet. Like, in the leveling process, it doesn't matter. And he was so pissed about it. I was like, dude, calm down. It doesn't matter in this game. Believe me.
The nature of the game itself. WoW is based in conflict. A game where two factions are pitted against each other from the beginning, so players already have an established enemy or other to focus their ire on. It is thematically ingrained in the community culture. And not only is player versus player part of the game, but so is competition on a PvE level, with world firsts and server firsts and more at a macro level, and then tools like DPS meters at a micro level to determine who is the best in the current party. Everyone is judging everyone at all times in Warcraft.
Yeah.
It can feel overbearing. Even WoW's
Dog
more
eats
cooperative
dog word.
events can seem like competition between players.
Yep.
As players are in the game longer and learn more and think they know more, biases form, opinions, valid or otherwise, take root, and soon the forums are littered with waste. You know, toxic. 14, at least in my experience, has been different. And it's hard to explain because, sure, there must be toxicity in the community.
There is.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it. And maybe that's streamer privilege. Maybe
No.
it's just I'm very lucky. I don't know.
There is, but it's rare.
Most people, if you ask, will tell you how nice and wonderful and kind the 14 community is. But it's also jarring. If you're a WoW...
I think that's the main point here. And sorry for interrupt again here. I have met toxic people in this community. But when they exist, they're getting ousted so quickly that nobody wants to do anything with them. Because people have realized that this is actually a pretty nice state Final Fantasy XIV is in. This relaxing, chill game. And every time a dig is coming around, everyone is like, you? No. Turn around, leave, or you change. Like one of the two things are happening, but you're not staying that toxic. Like, you change, or you take the door. Like one of the two things will happen here. And guilds will also be like very aggressive in that. Like even the high-end guilds, they're like, if you are bringing that toxicity over here, you are out. If I had time and money, well, if it is a money thing, the base game plus the first expansion is completely free in the trial. There is no time limit to it and only the level limit. Yeah. So it is basically hundreds of hours of gameplay completely for free. Check out the trial. No, seriously. Like, check out the trial.
Outsider
hundreds of
coming
hours.
to the Final Fantasy XIV community, there's a lot to understand that's different. Let me give you a great example. Rare mobs. Or in the case of 14, ranked mobs. In WoW, if you see a rare monster, you find a way to kill that thing as fast as you can, you grab friends, you grab guildies, you want that special drop. In Final Fantasy XIV, that's frowned upon by most of the community.
Oh, yeah.
I found this out one day when I saw a rare and asked my free company, my guild, for help. And they were like, dude, wait for the hunt train. I was like, what? What the hell are you talking about? It's right here, right now. And they explained that's not how the community does it.
Yep.
When all the rares are finally spawned, hunt trains form, and like 100 players move from zone to zone, killing them, each getting credit for the kills and any sort of rewards.
Yes.
This idea baffled me. I was like, I am here right now. What if I'm not online later? I have to pass up the kill just cause? And they were like,
Yep.
I know it sounds crazy, but having done multiple hunt trains now, I understand it completely, and I actually prefer it. It's almost like
Don't be a dick.
if WoW had this same concept, I may have actually seen a time-lost Proto-Drake once or twice. Warcraft eventually had moments like this. for
Think about the
Nashgar
others, and not
Mechagon,
just about
but
you.
It's not on the same level. This camaraderie in the 14 community translates to how they treat new players for the most part as well. Sprouts, as they are lovingly called, are new players with a little icon next to their name. Normally, one would assume an icon next to your name letting everyone know that you have no idea what you're doing would seem like you just got yourself a scarlet letter and became a pariah. But
I think this is, I have seen this even with some of my friends who played this game, and their reaction was, how can I get rid of this? Get rid of this sprout thing. And I was like, why? Because it tells that I'm a noob. Yeah, so what? No, get rid of that. They were afraid of this symbol. They didn't want it to be outed as a new player. I was like, relax. In Final Fantasy XIV, that's a good thing. No, you don't have to be afraid of this.
in Final Fantasy XIV, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Instead of trolling or treating them poorly, most players cheer them on or offer advice and tips in dungeons. It makes it easier to understand if someone has no clue what's going on. You can instantly see they're new, and it's okay. And the game even rewards players with bonuses for having them in your group.
Yep.
And that's what I think is so special about the community in 14. I've seen plenty of players try new classes or a build or whatever in both WoW and 14. And people can get intimidated about being yelled at for sucking or not knowing something. But in 14, that little sprout icon lets players know immediately that you're newer to the game. So they have an expectation that you might not know some things. And it makes it easier to ask, which is honestly the biggest problem in WoW. New players are always afraid to ask what to do. Just as an example of how this mentality rubs off on you, I was doing my 14 roulettes or dungeon dailies and got the final Omega raid. When it popped, I was in a group of almost all sprouts. For those of you who don't know, this fight is what you would call a complicated dance. We wiped. A lot.
Oh, yeah.
And in my guild chat, I was cursing up a storm. I was so upset that I had to go through this thing that I thought was going to take me 5 minutes, but I'm here at like minute 30. But in party chat with the sprouts, I was like, we can do this. Come on, I'll teach you how to do this fight. I've often thought about what sprouts in WoW would be like, and the only thing I can think of is that it would mostly be people dropping from parties that they showed up in.
Yep.
Again, this isn't to say the Final Fantasy XIV community is perfect. Obviously, assholes play all sorts of games, but the general nature of the player base seems a bit more relaxed. Yes, someone will tell me I'm doing something wrong while I stream, but that's every game.
Yeah.
For everyone. The biggest difference, I think, is the Final Fantasy XIV community does not tolerate a lot of the stuff that WoW does. The crackdown on bad actors is swift and immediate. And some of you may be like, well, that doesn't sound cool. I guess for the people who don't want to deal with that stuff, it's pretty cool. I don't know. The last big takeaway...
I had that actually back in the day. I still remember this vividly. I was a new player, and I was a new player. I was new in the dungeon, and I didn't know shit. I did a lot of mistakes. I was still learning my class. Like, there was a lot to learn, and apparently, one of the players who was in there had also like a DPS meter, which again is against TOS in Final Fantasy XIV. Or, well, you are allowed to use it for yourself, but you're not allowed to talk about it. Like, the moment you are looking down on somebody or you're posting the data or something, you can get banned immediately from the game, and they are very strict about it. However, that person completely treated me like a dick because he was like, hey, Mole, you are not performing. Like, what is going on here? I see your numbers. Like, this is not gonna happen. Like, dude, you are shit. Like, don't do this. Like, put up the slack, put in the work. Like, I will not go any further here as a tank. I will not pull the next group till you're not, like, telling me that you would do better in the next boss fight. And you know what happened? The other players in the group were like, dude, what the heck? Like, what are you doing here? Like, this is not okay. They were saying sorry to me, and oh my god, we are so sorry that this is happening with this dude. And then they kicked him. They kicked him, and then this is the craziest part. Afterwards, the guild leaders of those people which played with me and the guild they were in, they were like, dude, he is not in our guild. I'm sorry about this happened, but we will make sure that all the other guilds we're working with know about this guy. I will talk to the other guild leader, and this dude will never get in our guild ever again for anything. Like, he's not in there right now, but we will make sure that he will never get in there. And again, like, I would talk to the other guild leader of that guild he was in. I was like, wait, I have never asked for this. What is going on? And they have to try to make this like the most pleasant experience afterwards. And I was just baffled by that. I was like, wait, what? Oh, okay. Like, it's so weird. Hey, Zoe.
The way I have on community is this. The WoW player base seems always ready to attack their game.
Yeah.
Even while loving it. And the Final Fantasy XIV community is always trying to defend their game, even if it doesn't need it.
Yeah. 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 It is true.
So you've made it some 30 minutes into a YouTube video, and you find yourself here. This was all just sort of a long-winded way of
this is
saying
actually
again
a 1
what
hour
I'm sure I
YouTube
made
video.
clear in the first 5 minutes, but I really wanted to expand upon the differences between WoW and 14. And
Don't
how there are
question what
players
happens here.
who like each of these.
Don't
So I guess
question
that's
what
pretty much
happens
it for
here.
this video. Sure, there's definitely going to be something I missed or couldn't find a way to fit in the video. That's what comments are for, I suppose. So please, if you have something to add or additional thoughts or insights,
You have to play the
or if
quest
you
to
think I'm
understand
way
this.
off, let me know. This video was done out of love for both games and the knowledge that each has its own audience, and it's okay to like one and not the other. I hope the takeaway is that if you enjoy story games as much as I do, you'll check out 14, and if you can care less, you're probably already invested in WoW, and I don't see why you should leave. That's what it comes down to, at least for me. Anyway, thanks so much. Thank you to all the amazing patrons who make videos like this possible. Please, if you like this, share it with your friends or give it a like. That'd be swell. I would love it if you would consider subscribing.
Yes.
And hit the bell and do all the things that, you know, you have to do on
Please
YouTube in
check
order to
them
see a
out.
video these days. But that's it. Thank you so much. And I will see you in game.
Yep. But yeah, there was the 15 years of WoW versus 1 year of Final Fantasy XIV. It was fantastic. This video is by Jesse Cox. Let me actually give you the link.
Over the last few weeks,
Oh, let me give you the link very quickly. I have it open here. This is the video. Make also sure that you subscribe to him and put a like there. He put a lot of work into this video, and it was really good. And for all the people who have watched the reaction video of this on YouTube, and you have actually watched it for an hour, like, good work on that. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, you want to see more reaction videos, more Final Fantasy XIV videos, and many other videos here on the channel, I would appreciate if you give it a like. If you didn't like it, well, the dislike button is right next to it. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more, I would definitely appreciate if you consider to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon, because as Jesse just said, you have to jump through a lot of loops nowadays to actually see a video on YouTube. So don't forget that. I would appreciate it. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.